Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee on the 21st, Tuesday, the 21st of June 2022. I'm Councillor Paul Smith. I'm Councillor for St John's Ward, and I will be chairing the meeting this evening. Action in the event of emergency. There are no practice alarms planned this evening, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the town hall in St Ronald Street. This meeting is being held in the grand jury room of the town hall in Colchester. It is also being broadcast live over the internet, where it will be watched by the council's YouTube channel, where the recording will be available to view afterwards. Please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set to silent, and do not use the voice or camera flash functions. There are toilets on every floor of this building, and the induction loop is in this room. We may have a short break at 8 PM subject to the progress of business. Introductions. I will now ask the councillors to confirm the name and that they understand the procedures for the meeting. I'll start with the Vice Chair.
Evening all, Chris Pearson, Labour Councillor for Beerchurch. And yes, I think I do understand the rules of the meeting.
Sam McLean, representing Newtown and Christchurch, and yes, I do.
Councillor Sam McCarthy, representing Shrub End, and yes, I understand the rules of the committee.
Councillor Rees Smithson, and yes, Tiptree Ward, and yes, I understand the rules.
Councillor Barbara Wood of Tiptree Ward, yes, I understand the rules.
Dennis Willits, Lexton and Braeswick, and I too understand the rules.
Thank you very much. And we also have, as this is a hybrid meeting, some members of the council staff who are attending virtually. So welcome to Dan and Matthew and Fiona. Substitutions. I believe we have one this evening.
That's correct. I'm substituting for Councillor Dave Harris.
Thank you very much. There are no urgent items, so we'll move on to item 4, declarations of interests. Are there any declarations of interest at this stage? Thank you very much. There are none. Minutes of the previous meeting. I will invite the committee to confirm that the minutes for the meeting on the 8th of March 2022 and the 25th of May 2022 are correct. Councillor.
Yes, I'm sorry, I found a mistake on. I was substituted for the last meeting, and on the yes, I was substituted on the 20th of May, and it's been typed into in the Governance and Audit Committee on the 8th of March. It shows me as Councillor Tate for Councillor Barbara Wood. That should be shown on the May.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Wood, I can explain that. You are nominated to replace Councillor Tate on Governance and Audit at the end of this year, and she then subbed in for you at that meeting, which is why it's like that.
Oh, I didn't know. Sorry.
Well, we can. I can double check that before. Yeah. But you're right about the 25th of. I will double check that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I gave my apologies for that meeting. Yes.
Thank you very much. Certainly that was my recollection that the substitution there said that amendment can be made to the minutes for the 25th of May. And if you can just confirm the situation with HMR. Subject to that, are we all in agreement with the minutes? Thank you very much. That is agreed then. Item 6, have your say. Have we any have your say speakers today?
No, there are none, Chair.
Thank you very much. Then we'll move straight on to item 7, the head of the internal audit annual report. Hayley.
There are a few new members on the committee this year, so I'll give you just a very brief background to internal audit before I proceed into the report. So we run a comprehensive internal audit process, and it's actually managed for us by an external contractor, TIA. And Fiona and Olu, our two key members of staff from TIA, have joined us tonight remotely to answer any questions you might have on specific audit issues. So the audits are set by this committee at the beginning of every year. So just before the end of the financial year, I bring to you an audit plan for the coming year. And we look at the key areas of governance that we want to review in the organisation during the coming year. Now, primarily it'll be about financial controls and looking at those key income earning areas, but also any areas of concern where managers may have raised issues about internal controls or processes, and would include those in the audit plan. So during the year, you receive two reports. There's one this time of year, which is the year end for the previous financial year. And then you get a mid-year summary as well, around about November, January time. And that will give you an update on all the audits carried out at that point in time, and give you an overview of recommendations that have been made and any concerns that the auditors have with any of our systems. So in terms of the report that's been presented to you, as I say, it's the year-end report. So it's an overall summary of our processes and systems of control in place in the organisation during 21-22 financial year. And the head of internal audit report has an overall opinion. So each audit has an opinion themselves, and then we have an overall one, and that goes into our governance statement, which is the next item on the agenda. The key messages from the report that have been provided are that the TIA were able to provide a comprehensive internal audit programme during the year. They audited 19 areas, and 12 audits achieved a substantial assurance rating compared to 11 last year. So that's 63% of the programme received a substantial assurance rating, which is the highest rating that you can achieve. The number of limited assurance ratings did increase from 1 to 2 during the year, and the details of those are outlined in Appendix 3, the recommendation. And 3 urgent recommendations were made, and that's the same as last year. So within the report from TIA, they set out all of the audits that were undertaken, and they set out the number of recommendations for each one and some of the performance measurements for you. And as I say, the overall opinion that they're satisfied that we operate an effective system of internal control. As I say, in Appendix 3, I've set out for you the recommendations from the limited assurance audits and the findings, just so it gives you an understanding of the issues that were raised. The 2 limited assurance audits actually are of a very similar theme, so relating to procurement and contracts. So I don't intend to go into any more detail about the audit, but obviously, as I say, Fiona and Olu have joined us in case you have any questions on how those audits run or any specific ones, but open to any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Williams.
Chairman, yeah, it's good to see that majority of audits have a very good finding, and it shows things are well under control, and I think that has been a position for some time. And I'm never a great fan of patting ourselves on the back, but clearly there is no significant problem looking at the audits have been carried out. And we note that where there have been failings, they tend to be only in the compliance area, as we see on the table on page 25, not randomly or widespread across the entire aspect of audit. But I would like to address a comment just to the key findings on the limited assurance audit, where there are 2 of them, but they're highly interrelated. And reading these through, Chairman, I got just a little uneasy feeling about the way the procurement system is operating. Looking at the recommendations which deal with priority 1, priority 2, I mean, there's nothing which really stands out as a glaring error, but it would appear that there is a degree of inconsistency in the way contracts are let, to the extent that the audit has rightly kept coming back to certain themes associated with the way we are letting a contract. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's totally bad, but it does mean that there is room for improvement. So I hope you don't mind if I just pick this one area as an area where there may well be worries. And if one looks at the top recommendations covering the priorities 1 and 2, sometimes it's a bit difficult to see where the themes are going. Other than the fact that the auditors are picking up issues, it's not quite clear whether there's too much bureaucracy, too less bureaucracy, whether there's too much process or too less process, other than the fact that the auditors also have a bit of an uneasy feeling. I mean, on point 1, 2 of the 15 issues which were looked to test were found okay, but 13 suppliers were not selected via a tender process. But it's not quite clear to me whether that means that the use of purchase orders was a wholly satisfactory or a partially satisfactory alternative to the tender process. Second recommendation, the 7 areas of high expenditure, and the suggestion that there should be a review of suppliers who are addressing each particular category, but I'm not quite sure where that goes. It's interesting to see the stratification of the findings, but at the end of it, other than being told that there should be a review of what suppliers are in each category, I'm not quite sure where we go. Then on the third point, where we're dropping down to a category 2 recommendation, so not quite so urgent, we see that the central log of suppliers, I'm not quite sure whether it was suppliers or actually suppliers, is now defunct. And there was no reason as to why it became defunct. And clearly the auditors have a worry point, but there's no dialogue explaining why it happened and whether there were any mitigating issues on why the central log of suppliers was now defunct. And there was also the reference to local suppliers, and I'll come to that, back to that as a second point later on with your permission, Chairman. There was the point about small contracts no longer being a framework agreement, but there was no dialogue as to what no longer meant. You know, did this suddenly happen? Did it just fall apart in COVID? Was it a sort of a specific improvement which people thought, or the necessary officers thought, would be good to move away from framework agreements? And then point 5, the evidence, the 3 quotes where they were taken would not be maintained centrally, so no one really had a record of when 3 quotes were being taken, and the usefulness of following that process is ensuring that the council got best value. So yeah, one could continue, but I just don't quite follow where these audits are going and what is the general thrust and what should we be doing strategically to overcome the issues highlighted in these limited assurance audits. And I'll stop at that point, although I would like to come back to the issue on point 3 of the local suppliers, Chairman.
Thank you. Hayley, do you want to deal with that?
Yeah, in terms of the issues that Councillor Willits has raised, I can understand those concerns, and looking through the audit report, it does make it quite difficult to see how those issues have occurred. My understanding, and I'm sure Fiona and Olu may have something to add to this, is that the issues we have is that central control of use of suppliers, because we have such a varied range of services, and each service procures work themselves. So they'll procure their own cleaning supplies, they will procure their own stationery, they might procure their own food and drink for their particular service area. Whilst they are operating, they consider within the rules of the procurement process, so they're not breaching themselves any of the thresholds. When we combine that spend together as an organisation, we suddenly find that we're breaching them. And I think that's the control that we have at the moment, is that's what's missing, is that central and assessment of the combined spend across the organisation. But I don't know whether Fiona or Olu have anything else they'd like to add to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, Chair. I absolutely agree. And I mean, we could happily elaborate on some of these areas, but where you have got that devolved service, it would be very, very difficult to do that. One of the ways we have seen other councils overcome this is through their central register and having a central monitoring arrangement, so that although the services are devolved to procure themselves, they have that central support, but it does mean having more central support there to do it, and coordination. So as Hayley has mentioned, it's very difficult within a devolved service to manage that because it's been managed in a devolved way.
Thank you very much. That brings us a bit on to the point about the register issues that you raised, Councillor, and why they're not being maintained. Could we have some explanation on that?
Yeah, quite a lot of the items are originally purchased via a framework. So the services get used to using a particular supplier. For example, you use the cleaning material. They will use those suppliers, and the frameworks are not managed by Colchester Borough Council, so they're national frameworks, and those frameworks expire, but the services are used to dealing with those suppliers, so they carry on even though the national framework has expired. And there's no central check at this point in time to make sure that once that framework has expired, the services are using a new framework or going out to tender to look for different suppliers. So it's a case of, in some ways, it's a little bit of habit. They've got used to it, so that's the supplier they use, and they don't appreciate when the framework expires. They need to then resource either from a different supplier or through a new framework.
Thank you. Councillor Willetts, you had an additional point as well.
Yes, I'm just mulling over in my mind the answers given. There may be further points, or my colleagues may deal with it. But on point 3 of the key findings on the procurement item, central logger of supply catalogue used to maintain, but there's currently not in place. The council aims to use local suppliers. However, the Crown Commercial Procurement Framework is sometimes used. I just wondered what the issue was and why that particular sentence was included, and whether there was anything behind that, because you'll remember, Chairman, about 2 years ago, we had, I think it was in the policy panel, we had a long discussion section which went on for, I think it was about 6 months, about the issue of local suppliers and social value and the extent to which social value can be squeezed out of the council's contracts, in addition to the principal deliverable of these contracts. There was a degree of concern about that, because clearly if we're looking for a greater social benefit out of contracts, the contract falls into 2 parts. Those the payment for the part which is in the principal deliverable, and the payment for the part which is the additional social benefits, such as the grounds maintenance team going into schools to give pep talks and discussions on the benefits of plants and gardens. And what we see, of course, is the combined cost of a contract. What we don't see is the contract split into the price being split into those parts which are associated with the principal deliverable and the part which is associated with the enhanced social benefits. And I just wondered whether the issue on the use of local suppliers, I think the policy panel said that this was the prime issue for squeezing out more social benefit from the contracts, was in some way raising concerns with the auditor, or whether I'm just reading more into it than is there, because otherwise I don't quite see why that sentence has been included in the first part of recommendation 3.
Thank you. Could the auditors respond to that one?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I think where there's a policy decision made on where the procurement is going to be directed, where there is something that looks like it falls outside of that policy decision, really then you're looking at to see whether what is the policy decision going to be. So it's either really you've got to comply with that policy of where you want to go with it, or you really need to then reconsider what you actually want to include in your policy to make it very clear or on the direction you want to go with that. And I think the recommendation there and the comments were just really highlighting that something was outside of the policy.
Thank you. Is that satisfactory to you, Councillor Willis?
Have the auditors, Chairman, looked at the issue of enhanced social benefits being accruing to the council from local suppliers? I mean, is this an issue which has been looked at all, or is this just a throwaway remark on local suppliers?
Thank you. Fiona?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It wasn't part of the scope to go into that level of depth around that particular issue, but it's something that we can always reconsider in future audits.
Thank you. I see Dan wants to come in here.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just a couple of points. One, just to say, I think it's the council's policy to extract as much social value as it can from its procurement activity. I don't think it's, strictly speaking, the policy to pursue a policy of local suppliers at all costs. So there is a bit of nuance in there, which I'm sure we could provide some further information to the committee about as a follow-up from the previous discussions on social value and the work that Councillor Willits referred to. I'd also say, just as part of the background to this, is that this service area used to be within corporate services. It moved over to customer services about a year or so ago, and comes under Samantha Preston in customer services, who actually was very keen to explore using the internal audit process some of these issues, because these were concerns. Some of the concerns that have come out were known or suspected, and it's very helpful to have a detailed report which has been brought before the senior management team as well as before this committee to ensure we actually do put in place the action plan to address the concerns. So just to provide hopefully a bit of reassurance on that point.
Thank you, Dan.
Can we not lose that point when we're looking at the future audit programme then, Chairman?
I think that will be something which we will certainly take account going forward. Thank you very much. Councillor Pearson, I think you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it never ceases to amaze me how forensically Councillor Willits tends to interrogate these. He does them even more than I do, and has picked up some of the things that I would have picked up as well. And I'm pleased that even in the brief hiatus that we had in terms of administration of the authority, that the internal audit is not significantly different to the one before, and I'm sure will be likewise in the coming year. I think I've got two questions, and one is some of the things that I would have picked up in detail Dennis has already done, but one would be to ask Fiona and Olo if there's any, I wasn't quite sure reading between the lines whether there was any sense of direction that they were pointing this committee in terms of future procurement issues, and also just looking at the recommendation, rather than just reviewing and commenting on, given the remarks that we've just heard from Dan, whether we want to amend that recommendation slightly to say that we'd like to see something back in the course of the current year. So if I could just ask Fiona and Ola if there's anything in terms of direction of travel that they would like to point us in, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Fiona?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So in the direction of where you would like to, where the council would like to go, it's a management decision on how they want to arrange the services. So we can only highlight where the risks are and the I suppose the failings within a particular area where controls aren't being managed. For the council to decide on a devolved service or on a central service on how they would like that managed, that is a management decision. That we wouldn't, as internal auditors, it wouldn't be relevant for us to actually make.
Thank you. I think with Sam having taken over the area and the work that she's been doing, there's certainly going to be some interest in seeing the outcome of that.
Yeah, what I could possibly suggest, Chair, is that the procurement policy comes to this committee as part of the suite of governance policies we review in October time, so that what we know the monitoring officer meeting with all the ethical governance and policies, we could bring the procurement one as well, so we can give you an update at that point in time along with the policy itself.
Thank you very much, Eddie. I see lots of nodding heads. Councillor Pearson?
Yeah, I think that makes eminent sense, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Smithson?
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of points. I hope I'm not quite as forensic as Councillor Willits. Turning to the procurement assurance review, I have a question for Hayley and also the auditors. It makes reference in the key strategic findings to a culture of not including the procurement team in the process. Unfortunately, the report doesn't then actually elaborate on that at all. It just makes passing reference, and I'm a little bit disappointed that there's no recommendation around culture. So I have a question, which is that culture ingrained in the organisation, or is that something that's arisen as a result of COVID and hybrid working? People aren't in the office, therefore they haven't popped over and had a word with procurement.
I think the fair answer is it's a bit of both. So I think COVID has had an impact, ability to have those conversations, and I know myself in terms of not being able to just pop by and see someone and ask a question has had an impact. Dan refers to the move of procurement from the corporate team through to customer, and at that point in time we lost a procurement officer as well, so there was a reshaping of the team when it went over, slightly reduced resources in terms of the number of senior officers who were dealing with contracts. And I think there are a lot of contracts undertaken by the council. So whilst we've picked up this area of procurement being an issue, what it doesn't recognise is the number of contracts that are actually let through the procurement team every year. So I think there's a bit of people are used to using a supplier, and the review that we did of that one particular supplier, which was the second audit, highlighted the fact they're used to use it's very responsive, so they just carried on doing it. That's culture. It became easy, it became very straightforward to get things done very quickly in some circumstances when required, therefore it became the norm to do that. There's also that issue of not being able to communicate as we have done previously. I think that is a lot better. You know, our way of working now, our hybrid way of working has changed. People are used to being able to just call someone on a computer now as opposed to going to their desk. That happens a lot more. But I think it is a fact of we recognise that there's this issue. And as Dan has said, Sam has been fully involved in this in terms of those issues. And the particular contractor audit was requested by a different service area because it was a manager who was concerned about the number of purchase orders they were being asked to sign off by different parts of their team, and they had an uncomfortable feeling that they may have been breaching some of those rules. So that culture, I think, is something we're looking to address as part of the procurement review, and that will be addressed as part of the policy coming back to the panel.
Thank you. I'd be very keen to see what we're going to do around staff training and culture in that respect. A couple of things that stick out to me. Looking at the procurement review, there's no mention of things like supplier viability or key supplier continuity or anything like that. Was that not included in the terms of reference, particularly in light of COVID? Suppliers are more likely to be going into administration than the like. If it wasn't in the terms of reference, was there a reason why it was excluded?
I don't have the terms of reference to hand, so I can't recall off the top of my head. And Fiona and Ollie may be more detail on that. But what I would say is, having experience of procurement myself, so even in terms of the internal audit, we had to go through a procurement process, and we do it with insurance as well. Those questions are actually part of our assessment process, and I'm quite happy to provide you with our kind of blank processes so you can have a look to see the questions that we put out in our tender documents that asks for that information. So we do look at resilience, we do look at ethical standards, we do look at some of those more social values as part of the tender process, and that's part of the package that we put together as advice and guidance for managers.
Unfortunately, whilst I accept that that's part of the sign-on process, if we then don't renew the sign-on process for years to come, things slip through the cracks. So I would like to see, certainly in any new process or policy that we may come up with, I would like to see some mention of revalidating suppliers. And actually, one of the things that comes up in one of the audits, I think, is the key financial controls concerns suppliers and the construction industry scheme for HMRC. And there are requirements to do those checks annually. So I think it would make sense to do those more frequently. And then the final point I'd had, I guess this was a more general point, having looked at the procurement review, Bossman review, and the key financial controls review. Whilst I am loath to implement significant amount of bureaucracy, I just got the feeling that some of the more basic controls that I would expect to see have sort of gone missing, if that makes sense. Things like staff leaving and their access to IT systems not being cancelled for a month and things like that. I think it's just housekeeping to have those sorts of things done. And I was just generally keen to understand from the auditors whether they share that view that could just be a little bit tighter all round.
Thank you. Fiona, could I ask you to comment on that? I mean, I think, to be fair, from what we've seen in the report, there are concerns in a couple of the procurement areas that things weren't tight enough. There wasn't any obvious fraud, but there were weaknesses in the procedures. Is that a reasonable?
Yes, we do check access to the system. It's part of the test we do. The reason you won't find that in this report is because it's not an exception. So once it's not an exception, you'll find that in the body of the report that we checked and we found no exception. So we normally check access to the system and removal of access when the staff leaves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do know I have to work in internal audit myself, that one of the rules of internal audit is you don't report where things are okay, which means that the best report you can get is a blank sheet of paper. Though fortunately I was never able to convince my boss that just handing in a blank sheet of paper was sufficient work from me. Councillor else?
No, I'm finished. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much. In that case, I think, subject to what Chris has said about bringing back the procurement review, which I think is an area which is done there, I move that we approve this, and we also thank the internal auditors for their efforts in what they've done and in producing a significant portion of work, and in spending less time on it than was allocated in the budget, which is surely going to please at least some of my colleagues. So thank you very much. Colleagues, are we all in agreement with the recommendation there? Thank you. And we'll move on now to item 8, the review of the governance framework and the draft audit statement.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our annual governance statement, and for those members of the committee that haven't experienced this before, I'll give a very brief overview of what an annual governance statement is. We have a duty under the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015 to ensure that we have a sound system of internal control, which facilitates the effective exercise of our functions and achievement of our aims and objectives. We have to demonstrate as part of our annual statement of accounts process that we have those internal systems of control in place, and therefore we do a self-review every year of our governance arrangements. And we look back over the year to ensure that any areas of concern are recognised and highlighted, and to ensure that we have proper processes in place. We have to produce what's known as an annual governance statement itself, and we've produced the one for 21-22. That complies with the 7 principles of good governance set out by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy and the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives under their guidance, delivering good governance in local government. And if anybody wants a copy of that, I can provide that for you if you want to see the 7 principles. And we have to do the review of our effectiveness of the policies and procedures compared to those principles, and then set out the statement in the format that is set out by CIPFA. So the statement itself is a little bit wordy and probably not the format that we would use, but that's the standard statement that CIPFA asks us to comply with. We have to look at the, as I say, the areas of control. We have to look at our financial control, looking at an assessment of our financial procedures. That's a new requirement that has come in recently, for a self-assessment of the financial procedures, and also our head of finance to ensure that we have an appropriate officer in place to ensure that our finance arrangements are suitable. As part of the process, what I do is I actually interview every single member of senior management team individually on a basis of ensuring that we have a frank and honest conversation. So it's all anonymous when I put the details into the report. I take the comments that they make and I ask them some very difficult questions about the organisation. And I'm sure Dan will agree, sometimes I ask those questions in those meetings that I wouldn't ask any other time because I quite like my job. So, but I'm allowed to ask them once a year. And then I take the answers to those and I put together my review of how we've been governed, and I highlight any areas of concern, and we put that together in the statement. At the very end, we put a table of issues. Now, these aren't things that have actually possibly happened, but areas where we feel there could be improvements in our control arrangements. I also look at our companies and I do an assessment of the governance arrangements with our companies to make sure that they are actually performing as we want them to and that they're achieving the objectives we set out for them when we created them. And I also look at our 2 joint services. So we have Colchester and Ipswich Museum Service that we run in conjunction with Ipswich. We have the North Essex Parking Partnership, which is made up of several authorities in the north of Essex, providing parking enforcement arrangements. The joint committees have their own governance procedures and governance reports, and I take those separately to their committees. But if there's anything of concern in those, I would be flagging them up in this report as well. I also take into account the internal audit we've just been discussing, and I look at any particular concerns that have been raised in in audit reports. And then the final thing that I do is look back at the issues that were raised in the previous statement to ensure that we have managed those issues and improved the control arrangements. So I won't go into a huge detail about all the different policies and procedures that I've looked at. Would like to highlight the 3 areas where we felt that there could be some improvements in our control arrangements. So when I do my summary, I take it through to Performance Management Board, which is our senior management team. And we talk about the issues and agree that the areas that we think are ones that we want to put some controls in place to improve the arrangement we have. As part of the process, the report comes to yourselves for approval, and once you've approved it, it's signed off by the leader of the council and the chief executive and goes into our statement of accounts. For this year, the areas that we've highlighted, the first one, unsurprisingly, is procurement. So following on from the conversations you've just had, I think you would be concerned if I hadn't put procurement into the annual governance statement as an area we want to make sure is controlled more appropriately in the coming year. The second item that's gone in is one where we don't have much control over it, but it is an issue of concern for us. And those previous members of the committee will be fully aware of the problems that we've had in signing off our statement of accounts to our external auditors in terms of the performance of the auditors and delivery of the service. We are still waiting for some details from the 2021 audit to be signed off, which obviously is quite a long period of time if there are any issues of concern for us to be able to deal with those. And obviously we're now into the following year's statement of accounts as well. So it's not an issue that is just local to Colchester, it's an issue nationally. And I think it's fair to say it's probably not just the external auditors that we use. There has been some issues of concern with others as well. It's a matter that we're aware of. There is not much we can do to influence, but I think it's appropriate for us to highlight it on our governance statement as an area of concern. The final item that I highlighted was company governance. So as I said, I look at the arrangements that we have with our companies that we've set up. And I've highlighted the Colchester Commercial Holdings Limited arrangements. They've been operating for a number of years now, and it's appropriate that we review those governance arrangements, given the fact that over 4 years, our objectives change, the service delivery changes, and the officers involved in the arrangements have changed. And we want to make sure that there is suitable systems in place at the company, including the financial management reporting, as well as board responsibility and skill set to make sure that they are appropriately managing their governance arrangements and reporting them through to us. As you're aware, some members of the committee will be aware, they do report through to the Governance and Audit Committee during the year. So it's looking at making sure that they understand their responsibilities and it's a robust arrangement. We're not saying there's any problems, what we're saying is it's an appropriate time to review it to make sure it's still appropriate. Whether you have questions.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson, you've indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's useful to note, as Hayley already has done, that procurement is in here as one of the 3 primary areas for action. When it comes to the external auditors, we know that this has been an issue now for more than 2 years. And I just think that we should saying quite clearly from this committee that the authority, to use a phrase that's been bandied around a little over the last year or 2 or 3, use our best endeavours to ensure that the local government association takes this on board, but also that we raise it with central government, because it's not just an issue for this authority, it's obviously an issue for local authorities all over the country. And the final one I wanted to raise is just around Colchester Commercial Holdings Limited. Now, I know when I was chair of the committee, just after we'd established those, the Commercial Holdings Limited, we weren't quite sure how we were going to deal with that as the shareholder. But I think now we've got 4 years under the belt, it's probably time we dedicated a whole meeting to a sort of, if you like, a shareholders meeting with the CCHL board. So I would suggest that as part of our work programme, we incorporate that.
Thank you very much. I will just add on the external audit implications. I've certainly been raising it with my LGA group, and I'm sure others have been as well, but it really is not an acceptable position that when you're dealing with large amounts of public money, this situation has been occurring over a considerable period of time. That's no reflection on the situation of this council or any other council that's affected by this. But if external auditors are unable to provide assurances for organisations which are dealing with, in some cases, hundreds of millions of pounds of public money, it is a worrying concern, particularly with some of the other issues that we've seen elsewhere in this country on this one there. And Councillor Willits, I know also scrutiny has had some thoughts on the companies and how they can be monitored. Do you wish to make any observations at the point?
No, I think we're looking at different points. This committee is looking at it strictly from a governance viewpoint, where scrutiny is looking at it more for sort of operational effectiveness. And it is possible to combine the two views in one, but I might suggest respectfully, Chairman, that it might be better to keep them separate.
Thank you, that sounds very sensible. Hayley, could you respond to Councillor Pearson's comments, please?
Yes, I think in terms of the comments that Councillor Pearson has made, I think it's just that we agree with those comments and the viewpoint that you put across. And I think with the shareholders meeting for the companies, I think that's probably an appropriate form to take going forwards. There is an external review of those governance arrangements. So we're getting an external advisor in to look at those governance arrangements with the company. So it's probably appropriate after that review has taken place that we then arrange that dedicated meeting. And it's up to the chair and the committee whether you would require any pre-training to that meeting, some advice and guidance on shareholder responsibilities, because it's a different type of challenge to challenging my internal audit reports or things of that nature. And it's a bit of understanding and ensuring that the committee understands what you should be challenging and how you can challenge it. And I'm sure we can manage that if required.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, I think Hayley's suggestion is eminently sensible. It would be useful for all of us.
Thank you very much. Hayley, also on this matter of the local government associations involvement, I think Councillor Pearson also mentioned that.
Yes, in terms of the external audit issue, our finance officer is dealing with that in conjunction with our deputy chief executive, and they are making the necessary submissions in terms of monitoring what's going on nationally, because obviously there are other authorities in the same position who are considering what action they can take. We're monitoring that situation and we are making the relevant representations to the relevant bodies.
Thank you. Councillor Willits.
Chairman, just picking up a second comment on the question you just asked me. As a governance committee, I think we have been traditionally very keen to ensure that there is significant alignment in governance arrangements of the council and the companies, and there are sort of clear views why that should be. But we have to recognise that in imposing that on the companies and the company structure, it does limit their flexibility, and sometimes limiting flexibility comes at a cost. And Hayley is absolutely correct throughout, saying that we don't want any cavalier behaviour by the subsidiary companies, and indeed we've seen none, and there's no reason why they should have done so. It's been a well-ordered group of companies under the Borough Council, under Hayley's close watchful eye. But the question has arisen sort of in our minds from time to time, is there a cost, and is there a significant cost in ensuring that there should be a very close alignment of the governance arrangements? And I think perhaps that is an issue which perhaps we should be asking, because from our point of view, it is very convenient to say throughout the whole of the operation there is a sort of significant commonality of governance arrangements. But if in the end that defeats the purpose for which the holding companies were set up, that is to allow them to operate in a flexible manner, not constrained by some of the rules of local government, then we just need to understand whether those costs are justified when we say there will be standardisation and alignment throughout the whole of the company model. That is something which we should ask at some stage. I would indicate, Chairman, that my personal view is that the approach we've taken in the past is right, and we should be seeking maximum alignment between the governance standards of the companies and the governance standards of the council itself. Moving on to the second point, we had a throwaway remark earlier on about procurement. We'll have a procurement framework. We'll include that in the ethical standards, and it will come back to us in October. I'm not sure whether we have an objective criteria on what should be within the ethical framework. It tends to be a bit on the subjective side. Yes, this is an issue which has caused us problems in the past, like media protocol and the way councillors use their social media, so it gets put into the ethical framework. Does it continue to be an issue? Should it remain there forever and a day? If we go add the procurement protocols to the ethical framework, are we sure that that is an issue which is as significant as, say, the resources protocols or member officer relation protocols? So I just wonder whether we should have an objective criteria for what should be included in the ethical framework. Otherwise, the ethical framework just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the bigger it is, less effective it is, because anything which is too big to understand on one page tends to get ignored. And my final question is, could we hear just a little about the actions from 2021 statement, which are referred to on page 41, particularly the cyber security issue, which was raised earlier on. And I think there are ongoing concerns, particularly for those of us who operate in our business in a highly secure environment, and we have to do our council work, connect with the council systems, and at times we're not sure whether that is indeed a good policy, because we don't really know what goes on in some of the council systems. So those are the 3 points that I have, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think your first point is probably going to be your first question at our meeting where we have the various companies in there. So I think the question which is best probably answered by the directors to say, are there any freedoms that we could give you, and if so, what would be the benefits for them? Hayley.
Yes, and in terms of that first question, we'll also be asking the external reviewer to look at those arrangements as well, because we recognise that one size doesn't fit all, and some of the processes that we have to adopt may not necessarily be appropriate for the company. So as part of that assessment, we'll ask them to review the differences between the two governance arrangements and advise us on the most appropriate way forward, ensuring that we've got that reassurance back to members in terms of the delivery of the service. In terms of the ethical framework, I think that might be me misleading you slightly. I just meant we could bring it back when we bring the ethical framework back. Wouldn't propose to bring it as part of the ethical framework. We do bring some other policies at the same time. Anything that's been reviewed, we do as part of that policy meeting and update. So I would sit it definitely outside of the ethical framework. The procurement policy doesn't fit with the parameters that we have. And what I will do for the meeting in October is bring back the parameters that we set for the ethical framework. So the original report we did set out what we included certain policies in that and what constitutes the ethical framework, if that's okay. And then in terms of the actions for the previous items from last year, cybersecurity is a continuing problem. As you know, nationally, they're getting more and more sophisticated. I think there was at least one report brought to this committee last year by our IT manager in terms of cybersecurity and the arrangements that we have. It's a difficult one. We are always trying to ensure that the systems that we use are safe and that you can connect to them safely. We do a lot of testing. So you do get some test phishing emails every so often asking you to change a password or to click on the link with the IT team, because we are monitoring who is clicking on those links. So every time someone clicks on those links that shouldn't do, then the managers get a report to say, you know, you've got staff in your area who are still not abiding by the rules for IT. It is a continuing problem, and I'm sure that we can get a further update on IT and cybersecurity going forwards later on in the year if the committee so wish. And in terms of partnerships, we wanted to look at the key strategic partnerships going forwards, and obviously health has been a huge one during COVID. So a lot of work has been undertaken looking at the impacts of the Health and Care Act. So the integrated care systems you may be aware of. So we're working with which ones would be part of that North East Alliance, making sure we've got integrated neighbourhood teams, looking to make sure we've got accountability arrangements with local government. So we're continuing to monitor partnerships. That's not something that I don't think will ever be finished. It's just something that we are continuing to monitor, but I think the controls we have in place now are a bit more robust than they were this time last year.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smithson, did you indicate?
Thank you, Chair. Two questions, if I may, and this may be my newness, not understanding things. So on page 3, we talk about the section 151 officer being the position being held by the head of finance. Looked at the constitution and the member and officer protocol, which is dated November 2019. It's still Mr. Cook who is the thing, because the discrepancy between his job title and his job title in the governance. I'm just worried that the website may be out of date as it still refers to our former chief executive. So quite possibly needs updating.
Absolutely fine. In terms of, yes, it is still Paul Cook. He's our section 151 officer. I will talk to the monitoring officer about the constitution and ensure that he updates it when he's back from leave.
Okay, thank you. And then the second point was a point around the dates on page 4. Colchester Borough Homes, it says, was created in 2003, which is when the certificate of incorporation is dated. But Community Stadium Limited, it says, was created in 2007, but the certificate of incorporation is 2 years later. So is that a mistake, or was it created and changed or something? Thank you.
I have to check that one out. So I will check out the dates just to make sure. My memory doesn't go back that far off the top of my head.
Thank you very much for some very diligent research there.
Thank you, Jack. Just briefly to come back around, I think it's important to be mindful of why the set up. That they weren't just set up to generate, albeit it's hoped that they do, and that revenue is ploughed back into services. But also, picking up on Councillor Willett's points earlier, they were also set up to deliver social value. So, and that social value is likely to be in line with the administration's priorities at any point in time. So I accept that they will vary at times, you know, depending on which one of the political parties is holding the tiller. But nevertheless, I think we just need to be aware of the fact, and we are looking at CCHL and its various companies. We're not just looking at it as we would do the usual company that's looking to make the best returns possible for its shareholders. We are looking at also the best possible returns for the residents of Colchester.
Thank you very much. Councillors, I invite you to approve the recommendations in sections 1 and 2 and to approve the annual governance statement for 2021. Are we all agreed? Thank you very much. We'll move on now to item 9, which we've already touched on, I think, with a couple of items today, the work programme. Hayley, would you care to give us a brief introduction, or is it Matthew? Sorry.
No, it's fine. Thanks, Chair. Councillors, this is your opportunity to consider the proposed work programme for the forthcoming municipal year. As Councillor Smith has said, there's already been some proposed changes to it. So the committee is considering requesting an update on cyber security and the addition of the procurement policy to the November meeting which is the ethical governance framework meeting, and possibility of an additional shareholder meeting with board members of CCHL to take place after training had been delivered. I don't know if you'd be happy for officers to go away and work those dates in, or if, sorry.
Just very quickly, if I could help, Matt. I'm mindful of the fact that we've got the audit letter and opinion in there, which usually takes a bit of time. And based on what we've heard already this evening, we're unlikely to have that, aren't we? For the next meeting. So I'm just wondering whether it's possible to squeeze 1 or 2 things in a bit in the stuff that are relatively easy for officers to deliver in with a month's notice.
Yes. Would you be happy for us to confer about that outside the meeting and propose it to the chair and group spokes? And then
Hayley.
Yes, sorry, Chair. There was just one amendment that I would like to make because I hadn't noticed previously. Would it be possible to move the year-end review of risk management from the September meeting to the July meeting, please? Because we need to process that through Cabinet and then onto full council for the October meeting. So the report can be ready for July.
Problem solved.
Exactly. That's an excellent suggestion, Hayley. Of course, I'm sure everyone else was about to make that very suggestion. I see lots of people agreeing with that comment. Thank you. And I think for the other items, if you, again, the groups and chairs would be useful. Councillor Smithson.
Just for the benefit of the new boy in the room, would it be possible to indicate the items in the work plan that be delivered at a certain time because they have a statutory requirement? Just bold them or something so that, you know, thank you.
I think that's a very sensible suggestion. Hayley, could you do that for future?
Yes, definitely. We can mark that up so you can see the cycles. So obviously some of the reports that I produce for you, like risk management and internal audit, are cyclical. So you'll get them every 6 months, so I can demonstrate when they need to go.
Councillor Pearson, did you indicate or no? Right, I think we're all agreed on that then. So unless there's any other business, I think that concludes the meeting. Can I thank you for your attending and thank you all virtually.
Thank you.